Hi, I'm Anna, and this is National Queer News from a Humboldt point of view.
Hey Anna, it's really nice to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Will you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to?
Oh boy, a little bit about me. Well, I guess to tie into the queer news thing, I am a middle-aged transsexual person here in Humboldt County, going M to F, and other than that, just making all the adjustments that requires from life. It's a lot, pretty much everything changes, and I'm right in the middle of all that, and life is crazy.
Yeah. What kind of work have you been doing in the community as a trans person, helping spread information to people?
Well, I've been doing a lot of speaking events for about the last year and a half. 10 days after I came out, I did my first speaking event at College of the Redwoods, which was a presentation of the documentary film Trans. And then I was on a panel afterwards with a number of other people from our local community and outside our community. Since then, I've been doing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 8 community speaking events or school speaking events each year. I've spoken at CR multiple times, HSU. I've spoken to high school youth through Planned Parenthood, and things of that nature.
What is like one of the common themes that you often talk about? Are we talking about activism and human rights? Or are we talking about acceptance? And
I try to talk about basic education. This is what transgender means.
Right.
This is what transsexual means, because they're not exactly the same thing.
Do you want to define the two of them for us?
Transgender is a big umbrella term,
Okay.
and that is basically anyone who does not fit into the gender norms that society has established.
Okay.
Gender norms, gender roles, all of that is a social function, not a biological thing like this is set. And in our society, some of the gender norms are the men are supposed to go out and earn a living and bring home bacon, and the women are supposed to be the housewives, and those are, of course, very idealized traditional roles for our society, and I kind of make light of that a little bit. But that is a gender role within society. For a transgender person, we don't fit not only those general social roles, but also, I was born male, and I was raised to be a boy, and then an adolescent young man, and then a man, and society told me there were certain things I was supposed to do. I was supposed to go out and find a career. I was supposed to go out and get married. I was supposed to father children. I was supposed to be involved in certain social organizations and things like that.
Right.
And after a while, I found that really didn't fit me, which led to a lot of soul searching and a very long process, which I'm kind of nearing. I don't want to say the end of, because it never really ends, but certainly I'm nearing the culmination of a large chunk of it. So transgender is just a person who doesn't fit society's normal expectations of gender roles.
It's a giant umbrella, huh?
Big umbrella.
Big.
Transsexual is a transgender person who, for a number of potential reasons, feels that they have to change their body. And that change can happen in a number of ways, but feels like they have to change their body in order to feel okay with themselves in that body and the gender role and the gender identity that they have and portray.
So a term I often hear people use is like a body dysphoria. Like I look at myself and I feel like I was born with a birth defect or not in the right body.
And according to the American Psychiatric Association, who are the people who write all the diagnostic manuals for mental health, gender dysphoria, which is what I now am diagnosed as having, is just that. It is a disconnection with your body and or gender roles that usually manifests in the form of anxiety and or depression. It's viewed now very much like something like, oh, I'm going through a divorce and I have depression and anxiety because of that, or something like that. It used to be, up until May of 2013, that people like myself were diagnosed with gender identity disorder, which is what I was originally diagnosed with. And at that time, it was actually considered a mental disorder.
Okay.
Interestingly, homosexuality was taken out as a mental disorder back in the 1970s, but it took until
Was it really that long ago? Oh wow!
But it took until no, it was the 1970s. But it took until 2013 before gender identity disorder was changed to gender dysphoria, which changed it from a mental disorder to a basically. What's the term I want to use? Darn it.
Sounds like it's something more that you can be counseled through at this point and come out the other end.
Like an adjustment disorder.
Right.
An adjustment disorder.
Right. Well,
that was the term I was trying to remember.
Right.
So, getting back to what the difference is between transgender and transsexual, transsexual people have, well, all trans people basically have some form of dysphoria, gender dysphoria. Transsexual people say we're going to address that by changing our bodies.
Okay.
For me, that has meant hormone replacement therapy and will soon mean surgery.
Right.
Different people approach it in different ways. One of the important things to note is there is no wrong way to be transgender.
Right. I hear a lot of transgender bashing going on amongst social media and other people, and people just feel the need to be mean for whatever reason. And I often hear people say, you're not trans because you don't want to have surgery, or you're not trans because you haven't done this or you haven't done that. And I think it's a frustration that anybody thinks that there's... Is there a book out there on how to transition? I mean, did you get it?
There are actually a bunch of books on potential ways to transition.
Right. So everybody's got their own way of doing it.
But the reality is the accepted number, and this is probably actually low, but the accepted number for the United States is roughly 700,000 trans people in the U.S.
Wow.
I think that's definitely much lower because I think they're looking mostly at transsexual people. But if, let's say 700,000 is the number, just for the sake of argument, if there are 700,000 trans people in this country, there are 700,000 different kinds of trans.
Right.
None of us are the same. There are definitely similarities.
Yes.
There are definitely patterns that can be observed and that emerge over time. But there is no wrong way. I don't think any two humans
are alike, right?
Well, no. Society wants to think we are.
Right.
But the reality is we share a few common things. We're all humans. We all breathe oxygen. We all eat.
Right.
And pretty much after that, it stops.
Right.
So yeah, there's no wrong way to be a trans person. Whatever path that person decides they need to pursue, that's what's going to be right for them, hopefully. And most of us adjust it as time goes by. I thought that I was going to transition, go stealth, and completely disappear into society. Now here I am on a public access cable program talking about, being a very out transsexual person.
Well, I really admire you for being a public person and coming out and talking about this, because there are so many people out there that are really struggling with kind of the darker side of it, the intense depression, the rejection of family and friends, and stuff like that. And so it's great to see that there are people out there that are doing this successfully, I guess I kind of want to say, or doing this with a lot of grace and strength. Because it's difficult.
It is difficult, and a lot of the success that some of us manage, and I am considered by a lot of people to be a success story in this. A lot of those of us who succeed do so because of the people who surround us. You talked about the depression, the anxiety, and the things, the dark places that go along with that. I am a suicide, I attempted suicide multiple times. The accepted number there is about 41% of us attempt suicide at some point in our lives. The reality is it's probably higher because there are a lot of suicides that are going to go unrecognized and undocumented because someone was not presenting in their gender role when they ended up committing suicide. So it's probably much, much higher than that, but the accepted number right now is about 41%. I'm a member of that group. I made it through not because I am that awesome, but...
Well, I think you're awesome,
well,
but, you know.
I'm awesome, but I'm not that awesome. I made it through because of a number of factors. Partly was I didn't want to inflict that upon my children. Partially it was just intervention by the universe that I cannot explain, and it just so happened to work out that way. But once I did get to a point where it's like, okay, I'm through, I'm through the suicidal ideation, and I got to a point where I recognized I needed help with moving on in life. I was fortunate to have the resources to then seek psychiatric help to deal with the disparity that I had with myself and with society.
That brings up an interesting point. How do you think privilege kind of affects your ability to transition?
Drastically. Yeah. Privilege is huge.
Right.
Everybody in the society has some privilege. Just the fact that you're born in the United States means you have privilege that other people in other countries do not have. I was born as a Caucasian male, which guess what meant I had a lot of privilege. And I didn't realize how much privilege I had until I suddenly wasn't a male anymore in most people's eyes. But the reality is I have a lot of things going for me that a lot of people don't have, and I recognize that. I still, of course, have Caucasian privilege in our society. I lost male privilege, but I have been told by most people I know that I've gained passing privilege, and certainly the way I interact with society reinforces that for me. I am privileged enough to live in a state where health care is mandated by law to cover trans health issues. I am in a country where health care is readily available to many or most people now. I have the ability to actually pay for what it is that I need to have done, because even with health care, it's not completely covered. And I have amazing friends who back me up. Now, all of that gives me advantages over people who are more isolated or who are in places where healthcare is not available to them, or where it is not mandated by law to cover trans health issues. And certainly, people of different ethnic groups than myself suffer far more than I have through this process.
How do you feel about the healthcare overall? Like, being here in Humboldt, it's a pretty small community. We're kind of rural. We don't have, state-of-the-art, high-tech stuff, So, you're traveling.
Yeah, I'm traveling quite a bit.
To get most of the healthcare that you need, because it's really not available. So that's just another expense, right? Now we have to drive,
sure.
For gas and
That
hotels.
said, like I do my hormone therapy through the Arcata Open Door Community Health Center. They have a great staff that interacts with the trans population very well. Some people prefer not to go there for reasons of their own. I've had great service there. That certainly, everyone gets to make their own choice. But that's where I go for hormone therapy. For surgery, I'm going to be seeing Dr. Satterwhite in the Bay Area. I know a lot of people who don't have health coverage covering theirs will go to Thailand. I've known other people who've gone to Canada, other people who've gone to England, and places where they can, for whatever reason, afford to go there, favorable exchange rates, that sort of thing. because I live in a state that is now covering this, and because I have a good health plan through my work, I get to have this done 5 hours from home instead of 18 hours via plane.
Right.
But that means that I still have to go out of the area for electrolysis as a preparation for surgery. I've had to get, like, you know, I had laser hair removal on my face. I had to go out of the area to get that. So living in an area with limited health resources has certainly impacted my journey through transition. But again, I'm privileged enough to have the resources to manage that. I know other people who do not. Right. And that's a very difficult burden for them.
Yeah, it can be a huge financial burden to travel. So social media.
Oh boy.
Is social media your ally or your enemy?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It has been both at various times. There was a time, several years actually, where I ran joint Facebook accounts, one under my birth name and one under my current name. And those were completely separate for years.
Right.
And then I began, as I started the process of coming out, to bring people from my birth name account over to my actual name account, my chosen name account. And that was a long process. It was an interesting process to see what different people, you know. I think everyone, when we come out, whether you are trans or gay or bi or whatever, and I would throw kink in there. If you come out as one of those things that society says is not normal,
right, the anti-norm,
most of us lose some people.
Yeah.
And I certainly did.
Yeah. I've lost a lot of people. I came out as not a vaccinating parent, and people, man, were like shocked and surprised, and I lost a few friends. Whatever.
You know, we all have circumstances in our life. We all make certain choices,
Totally.
and other people get to make those choices for themselves. I lost people, interestingly enough, when I came out and got to actually be me instead of the role that society had told me I was supposed to be in. I gained more friends than I lost.
Oh, that's awesome.
And those people around me have been like the thing that has lifted me up, you know. If someone is a success, it's because they're standing on someone else's shoulders. Right. And that's certainly the case for me.
I think our little community here is pretty accepting, despite the fact how rural and kind of the way we are. Right?
Generally, yes. And
I mean, do you feel safe walking down the street at night?
So you were asking, you know, do I feel safe walking down the street?
Right.
How is our local community? Yes and no. I remember, like, when I lost male privilege, and it was really apparent because it was suddenly, I don't feel safe, like, in a dark parking lot. I used to, like, just like, okay,
right.
Here I go, I'm a guy.
Right.
And go, you know, I would go where I wanted.
So when you say, like, you lost male privilege, do you think is that the point when you became passable? That you were...
Yes, and I basically swapped one privilege for another. And I remember when that happened, mostly because that was when men started opening doors for me. Which was really weird because my entire life, I was raised like old school, so it's like the guy's supposed to open the door. Right. So to this day, I open doors for people and they're like, what?
Right.
And all of a sudden men started opening doors for me, and men started doing things for me, and men started asking if they could help me with stuff, and men started calling me sweetheart and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh, if you only knew.
Right.
One of the things that's really funny and infuriating is like when I go to a hardware store or an auto parts store, because I used to, you know, I can fix my own brakes and stuff
right.
like that, you know, I've built buildings, and it's suddenly, oh, what do you need, hon, you know, and all this just like condescending stuff, and it's like, really? And I love telling them, no, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Right.
And they're like, oh, you know, and it just kind of puts them back on their heels a little bit. But that's me having fun with the loss of male privilege and the gaining of passing privilege. I can expect that it's more difficult for people, and I experienced this for a short amount of time, who have lost male privilege,
Right.
but not gained passing privilege.
Right.
Those for those of us who transition, those especially male to female transitioners, those are the dangerous times, because society doesn't know what to do with you.
Right.
And how to treat you, and people don't like that.
Right.
And that's when violence is more possible, more common.
Yeah.
And I've been very, very, very lucky in that I only had one interaction that was like very, very negative and frightening during that time. Now society treats me like a woman, which for me is wonderful.
Right.
But again, I recognize that I get that because of certain privilege.
Right. So let's see, we've talked a little bit about the privilege side and stuff like that. We talked about financial privilege or healthcare privilege or just gender privilege within each other and stuff like that. You want to talk a little bit about Caitlyn Jenner? And
okay.
Privilege seems to be a word that gets thrown around with her a lot right now.
So my opinion on Caitlyn Jenner. Normally, I despise and loathe anything that is celebrity, especially like that you would see on Entertainment Tonight or anything like that. More so if it has the name Kardashian attached to it in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
What I will say is this. Hooray for Caitlyn. It's got to be very difficult to do this in the media spotlight. It's difficult to do this out of the media spotlight. That said, Caitlyn is in a very privileged position financially.
Right.
Has lost a little bit of privilege, interestingly enough, with the loss of anonymity. She's doing everything and everyone's looking.
Very closely.
That said, she's not the only person to have done that.
Right.
Laverne Cox, Janet Mock, Laura Jane Grace, Kristen Beck are all male to female trans people who have transitioned in the spotlight. Or have transitioned and suddenly found themselves in the spotlight because of their transition.
Right.
And I've actually met a few of those people, and they're really interesting people to talk to from my perspective anyway. But Caitlyn brings about a great opportunity to have a very real discussion about privilege. Caitlyn is a famous and very wealthy Caucasian person who's going through a late midlife transition. And hopefully this will help to ask, make people ask questions. Well, wait a minute, if it's good enough for people of means and privilege, why are we not making sure that people with fewer means and less privilege are able to have the same basic health care and human dignity and treatment allowed them?
Right. I read an interesting comment on my Facebook feed after posting a photograph of Caitlyn. Someone had made a snarky comment that said, at least the public doesn't have to pay for his transition. And it kind of goes back to that, under Obamacare, the states are adopting, that under that health care. I'm a public person. I pay taxes. And it doesn't bother me that that is covered under health insurance. It shouldn't be a privilege, to be able to have access to that type of medical care or treatment shouldn't be a privilege. It should be available for everybody.
I agree.
Regardless of your income bracket.
One of the interesting things that happened in this state, especially when insurance started covering trans health care, is it suddenly became what they're terming medically necessary. Well, if it's medically necessary for Caitlyn, and it's medically necessary for me, why isn't it medically necessary for a person of a different ethnic background in a disadvantaged neighborhood in San Francisco or New York or Miami, or what's the difference there aside from pigmentation and dollar signs?
Right. Yeah, everybody should be, should get what they need.
So we have safety nets in our society for a reason.
So, do you want to go to the White House with me and go check out the new transgender bathrooms?
I would be happy to, because finally there's some place that actually has transgender bathrooms.
Right. Like
there. I saw that on Facebook not that long ago. Bathrooms are an interesting thing for trans people. And I mean, from my perspective now, I pass, so I go use the women's bathroom, and that's that. For those people who don't pass, or those people who aren't trying to pass, and this is an issue like for non-binary people, where do you go to the bathroom? Right. We have mostly on the North Coast, we have mostly gendered restrooms. Right. And it's like, okay, which one do I use? I don't know, because you can go into one and get screamed at and yelled at and called a pervert, or you can go into another one and get beat up. Right. That's a hard decision to have to make. It really, it baffles me.
I just want you all to know that you take your bathroom privilege for granted.
That's
okay?
right.
Don't take for granted that you have the privilege to go to the bathroom.
I think one of the things that most trans people would love the general population to know is that we go to the bathroom to pee.
I asked if we could have signs on our doors that said that just said, "Excuse me, I just need to pee."
Yeah, I don't go to the bathroom to peek over the stalls or anything like that. I go to the bathroom to pee and to wash my hands and put some lip gloss on and check my hair.
I can walk into a men's bathroom and it's way different than for a man to walk into a woman's bathroom,
Oh, absolutely. And that was one of the things that I learned when I had kids, and it's like, okay, a woman can go into the little boys section and buy underwear, and that's fine. But if a grown man goes into the girls' clothing section and picks up a pack of panties, he's a pervert. Right. Double standards are horrible. But even on college campuses around here, there have been very few gender-neutral bathrooms. That's changing, and I applaud those efforts. That's a wonderful thing. But a lot of trans people, and there are actually cell phone apps for this, will have a list of bathrooms that are safe. Right. And it's like, wow, that never had to think of that before.
Right. So, during your transition, as we transition into the last few minutes of our segment here, who's your hero? Who do you admire?
Well, there are a number. I can't just give one. I can honestly say that Laura Jane Grace, who is the lead singer for the punk rock band Against Me, has been one of mine. It was actually one of Laura's songs that was released when Laura was still Tom Grable that helped me stop on my last suicide attempt. Janet Mock has been an inspiration. Laverne Cox, obviously, simply for the amount of visibility that both of those two people have had. Others have been smaller figures, people who work behind the scenes a lot more. One is Lana Moore, who is a fire captain in Columbus, Ohio, and a very inspirational woman. And there's so many little heroes at different times. I couldn't name them all.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you've had people to look up. I'm glad that we have so many great role models out there to look up to and kind of draw some inspiration and some strength from. And
Jennifer Finney Boylan was one that I read her books, and it was like, oh, yeah, that's me. Got it. Okay.
It's good that you find somebody to relate to. It kind of makes you feel like, okay, I'm not
the only one.
Right.
Which is what I thought for a very long time.
Right. Yeah. Well, Anna, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy life and giving me a few minutes of it and coming in to just kind of talk about these things that I think are really important. So thanks again for being here. I'm really happy to have you, and I look forward to seeing you at Humboldt Pride.
I will be there.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. I'm Naughty, and this is Stand Up Humboldt.